I was born and raised a Jehovah's Witness, which means most of my family are too. I no longer identify as one, but I'd like to recall a time I went out preaching with them. It was in 2012. I and another youth who I'll refer to as Cameron were assigned to preach on a side of town that I deeply disdained, mostly due to the dogs and a few other things, but there were many stray dogs, junkyard mutts, and of course the rabid ones. Yet, I had faith that our God would protect us, and I took the lead in knocking on doors and letting my friend Cameron read my scriptures. In about an hour, we had cleared most of the neighborhood. Myself, Cameron, and our fathers, who took the other side of the street. As we came to this one house, though, Cameron asked to do the initial talking, and I would read his verses. As we moved through the fence to the house, Cameron knocked on the door as I turned to the scriptures. Right when Cameron finished knocking on the door, an elderly white man opened it. Cameron greeted him and introduced me, and he then began to ask the man's name. The man didn't answer Cameron's question, but instead asked his own. He said, "You one of them Jehovah's?" We replied yes, and the man then asked us to wait there as he shut the door. This struck me and Cameron as odd, when all of a sudden I heard growling and snarling coming from the other end of the door. Cameron ran first, and as I followed, I heard the man say, "Get him, Tobias, get him!" We ran as fast as we could and bolted over the gate, Rottweiler in tow. The dog narrowly missed us and growled and snarled. Cameron began to cry as our dads consoled us. My dad wanted to confront the man, but Cameron's dad simply drove us away as the old man stared at us from his porch. I think it's safe to say that no one will be attempting to preach to him again. While I was 18, I used to accompany my parents as they preached from door to door. A little background. My family comes from a long line of preachers, Southern Baptists. This story occurred in Kentucky. My father had just taken me on as an apprentice. He wanted me to be the next pastor, and what better way to do that than a day out street preaching? As my father and I made it through this particular neighborhood, it became ever apparent that we weren't welcome here. This part of town was poverty-stricken, and during those times, many didn't want to hear about a white savior. Nonetheless, my father pressed on, and we spoke to many. As we came to one house in particular, though, I got this unnerving feeling. I stopped my father as we approached the gate, but he told me to simply pray for boldness, as we had to preach all with the gospel. The house in question sat on the edge of the cul-de-sac. It was an elevated yet run-down home, and honestly, I didn't think we'd find anyone in it. As my dad led the way up the stairs, though, I noticed the eerie silence alongside the roaches and other pests that infested this property. Nonetheless, my father knocked on the door. Suddenly, a woman answered. My father then began his bit on her walk with the Lord, and etc., etc. The woman just stared at us, as my father and I then noticed a cat approach from behind the woman and sit by her feet. As my father continued preaching, this cat truly just unnerved me. In fact, this entire scenario did. I had this feeling like something bad was just going to happen at any moment. It was then my dad offered to read a verse. The woman breathed heavily, and my father took that as the initiative to usher me to read John 3:16. I mean, you know the verse. We all know it. As I began reading, though, I began to hear low muttering. My father and I paused, believing it was the woman. Amidst my utter horror, we peered down to see it was the cat. I screamed as my dad grabbed me. The woman then began shouting and cursing God while praising Lucifer. As my dad and I fled, I looked back to see the cat on the steps now, just staring, golden yellow eyes, dark void-like fur, and that sinister, evil grin. My father drove us out of there, and we vowed not to speak about this to the congregation, or anyone for that matter. That event played a deep part of fear into me. I am still afraid of the occult and anything supernatural. As I now preside over our family church, I've never gone back to that neighborhood, even though I was told most of it had been demolished. I shudder at night sometimes because the deep fear still creeps into my mind on what exactly was that? Was that just really a cat or something else? There you have it. 2 scary preaching horror stories. If you're enjoying my content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Goodbye for now, and see you again soon on the next Recreant Journals, where fear is everything.